Welcome to our session on developing transparency through courageous conversations, and we very deliberately chose that title thanks to our awesome wordsmith, Judge Cohen, and in part because what we're going to discuss with you and what this requires really is a lot of courage. These conversations can be really difficult. By nature, this work is very adversarial, and by right, parents should be allowed to be upset and angry and frustrated and scared. It doesn't matter why their kids are in our path. The fact is we know them. And if we can openly and courageously discuss even the hard topics with our parents, we're treating them with dignity and respect. We are honoring them in their experience. And we are operating as professionals around the table and modeling for them how to work collaboratively, how to negotiate with the very people who have their children. But you have to have the tools in your wallet to, or your belt to do this work. And so what we're going to share with you is from a number of different angles, actually, on how we do this and how we develop these types of conversations, and more so the importance of developing these conversations. Where's the clicker? Is this the clicker? It is? Thank you. I have not been up here, nor have I noticed anybody actually clicking, so I'm going to try to be as slick as everybody else was when they did it. Okay, so our goals for this session are to talk about the capacity to communicate with parents and support successful outcomes, to talk about how we receive resources for support and practice of courageous conversations, and also some learning strategies on how to create safe spaces for parents. I should just hang on to it? Okay. Thanks, Janie. And then I don't have to hide behind the podium. How awesome is that? Could y'all see me? No? Okay. Are you standing up? Thanks. So we're going to lead out with Judge Cohen, actually, in modeling the practice of courageous conversation and what we like to call warming your way into a courageous conversation. So, Judge Cohen, can you give us some of the steps that you take judicially in order to engage parents and build that relationship?
Sure. Judges have, can you all hear me? Doesn't feel like this is on. Okay. Judges have a unique opportunity and I think a responsibility to set the tone from day one in the courtroom for these courageous conversations. They have the opportunity and the responsibility to say and to practice the notion that we don't need you to be perfect, but we need you to be honest. Because it's only through honesty that I can know what the value of the services you're receiving are and what else you might need. And that comes with trust. And that comes with those relationships that are built all around. And the judge also has the opportunity and responsibility, I think, to remind everyone else what their jobs are. I often educate parents about what their attorney's role is on day one, so that they can understand what they should expect from their attorney. And in so doing, if I have an attorney who's kind of new to the world of problem solving and non-adversarial approaches, then they're getting that education as well. When we speak together and support each other, that message gets delivered in many different ways. Now, I know that my message to parents is not received, because I know when they come in the courtroom, especially at day one, they are so stressed. They are frantic. Things are not sinking in, which is why at the end of the hearing, the first hearing and every hearing, I ask, who can spend some time with the parent, with the client, to explain what exactly happened here? And we also know that the capacity of the parent to understand what we're saying, day one, when they may be completely in their addiction still, or struggling with a mental illness that isn't medicated, or just, completely stressed out, deer in the headlights because of what's happening to them. That's not the same reception that they're going to be capable of at disposition or at a review hearing later on when they are healing and when they have some more trust in the relationships. So in the area of concurrent planning, I'm going to talk about that. And I apologize to the people from Florida because you've heard me talk about concurrent planning since Wednesday morning before this even started. But that is one of the areas where we really need to have that courageous conversation from the beginning. And I just came fresh out of Dr. McHale's session, and so I'm going to throw something else in here too. It's not just the courageous conversations with the parents, but with the caregivers, with the foster parents. He told the story of the foster parent who's driving along and hit the speakerphone when she got a call from the social worker, and the child who was able to understand what was going on, a little bit older child, hears the conversation, and it's the social worker asking if the family would be willing to adopt the child. And that's the first time she's heard about it. The child's in the backseat listening to this for the first time. So the preparation for these courageous conversations is so important, regardless of whether it's the parent, the foster parent, the relative caretaker. We have to be sensitive to knowing all of those count. And the best thing that I came up with that I wish I had come up with earlier, and other judges have said they are glad to hear this little tool, is 3 little words. Or 4 little words, sorry. I'm not good at math, that's why I'm a lawyer. The law requires me. The law requires me to tell you that I have a certain amount of time within which to reunify you, and it's my job to make sure that you have the services you need, la-da-da-da-da. It's your job to make sure I know what services you need. The law requires me also to do concurrent planning. Now, that's a social work term that got, as you know, legal muscle with the Adoption Safe Families Act of 1997, but this has been going on since the 70s, but it's been under the table, will you adopt? That's what we're saying to the caretakers with the families in the room, and they know we're talking about that, and that builds what? Walls of distrust. Because what I'm seeing isn't what I'm getting, really. They've got this secret plan. So we're going to be transparent now, empowered by the Adoption Safe Families Act, to put it on the table for everyone to see. The law requires me to make sure we have a viable concurrent plan. So Grandma and Grandpa, you don't need to tell me today, but I need you to think about, search your souls, that if we can't have a successful outcome with the child safely returning to the parents in the time the law requires me to do that, I need to know if you are available and able to adopt this child and provide the child with the forever family the child needs. And I'm not saying this, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, to upset you. Again, the law requires me to do this. And then we're going to set that permanency hearing at adjudication so that the parents always have in writing, in bold type, unless otherwise ordered, permanency hearing shall be held on this day. And we're going to have lots of hearings before that. And always encouraging the parents, your job is to make sure I can do the unless otherwise ordered. And you need to tell us what you need and when you need it. Two other areas that I want to bring up, and because I also have some help for you in those areas, the identity of the birth father. So very important. We all know that. For those of you who may not be as familiar with such things as the Fostering Connections Act, know that the agencies are required to notify every known adult relative of the child within 30 days of removal. That's a federal requirement. Also know that if mom identifies the boyfriend of the time, the guy that went to Lamaze classes with her, the guy that held her hand during labor, as the father on the birth certificate, and everybody knows he's not the real father, and then, of course, they break up, and then that's a mess. We need to know the identity of the birth father. Even if he is a monster in her eyes or in her family's eyes, we need to know so we can protect her from him. And we also need to know things such as cultural connections, because perhaps the father is an enrolled member or is eligible to be enrolled in a federally recognized tribe. And then that triggers the Indian Child Welfare Act requirements. So there are so many reasons that we need to engage those fathers early on and know whom they are. And again, this isn't the kind of question you want to ask when you're first meeting a parent, but you need to. Again, the law requires me to make sure we have all the necessary parties at the table so that I can have orders that have authority. Because if I'm making orders about the wrong people, then they're not going to have any authority. And if it's possible that your child qualifies for the protections of the Indian Child Welfare Act, there's a whole new set of rules that apply, and they're very protective. And we need to know those things. So that's another courageous conversation you need to have. And then later in the presentation, I'll probably talk about the third difficult one, and that is when's a good time to have your next baby? Because we know that even if parental rights are terminated, they can have more babies. And I know how many parents I had testifying at termination of parental rights hearings that were testifying while pregnant. Replacement babies are a huge cohort of the children in the families we serve. So there are tools for this. I have developed, and it's in your materials, a birth mother's affidavit regarding paternity. So this is a form that the most trusting person in the case can go over with the parent, and they can take it and fill it in as they think about it. But whoever has the time and the relationship with the parent is the best person to do this. And then also the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges has this wonderful technical assistance bulletin. It's called When You Decide, and it's really geared toward prevention of unwanted pregnancies among foster youth, but it's applicable especially to our young parents. And there's a bench card in there. So sorry if I went on too long. Give a judge a mic and watch out.
Thank you, Judge Cohen. Tiffany, you're in a very unique position as a facilitator, not really someone that has a dog in the fight at the table, but able to actually access parents directly and model not only for that parent, but for the group. So could you speak to even some of the tools and tricks that you have in ways to engage parents and make them feel supported?
Sure. I was thinking about that when Judge Cohen was speaking, as the environment, I think, plays a large role. So in a family team meeting environment, can you hear? In a family team meeting environment, it automatically lends itself to more of a community feel. Mm-hmm. So I think what might be difficult conversations outside of that room are not necessarily difficult conversations inside that room. They're more normalized because we're with the family all the time. So I spoke earlier, but I think by creating an agenda where it's labeled clearly that the goal is reunification, there's a concurrent goal. We talk about it up front. We talk about it often, every 5 weeks, what that looks like, so we have parent input. I think that's critical. And I think by discussing it often and frequently and talking about what they want for their life during every family team meeting and kind of going along that path with them, it creates a family feel so that those conversations do come more freely. So it is a completely different environment, and I think maybe it's something that we take for granted, but just kind of putting it out there, explaining what we're going to talk about, how we're going to do it, and having everyone's input. So it kind of lends itself to an easier, I guess, way of talking. Yeah.
We couldn't do it without you.
Oh, thank you.
And so Laura, you have to know Laura. She is the attorney at Litem in our case, but oddly enough, she does what we call working beyond her chair. And so I'd like to hear from Laura, if we could, about how, even as the at Litem representing the child, you engage parents or you've seen that movement happen in the room.
I practice with Tiffany in an area with Tiffany, and where she is our facilitator. And the environment is very, very important, but I try and build a relationship with the parent to explain my role. My role is to always advocate what I think is in the best interest of the child or children, and that I'm there to help them reach the goal. So if the goal is reunification, I'm there to help them get their children back. Now, I let them know that our interests may not always be the same, as far as if I see things differently down the path and the parents aren't progressing like they should. But I try and build that early on so that we can get honesty, because if parents don't feel like they can disclose things at the family team meeting, if they feel that there are judgments there, we cannot get them the services that will benefit them the most. And if we can identify the services and let them work through those things and progress, then they get their children back. And that benefits everybody. Obviously, that's what the kids want, that's what the parents want, so I try and tell them I'm there to support them. They often see me as their biggest obstacle, so if I can gain that early on, that I'm there to help, then when we have the really tough discussions, they know that I've always advocated for their children. They know that I've always advocated towards the goal that they've been trying to achieve, and at this point in time, it's just not working. So I think that honesty helps build that trust so that we can have those difficult conversations.
Thank you, Laura. And so Denise is in a unique position also because she's representing parent partners. And so I want to ask a slightly different question to you, Denise. What works and what doesn't work when you're trying to engage parents?
Well, as a parent partner, I think we have an advantage with connecting with families just because of our shared experience of the removal of our children and multiple issues, whether it's substance abuse, domestic violence. So we almost have an instant connection with families, and we can have real conversations. I think as a parent, what I need to know the way out. Because we know families come in and they're lost. If they knew the way out of that situation, they would have already done it. We need to know that there's success at the end, and we need to know that there's hope for families. I can tell you, when I first came into the system, I did not believe there was hope. I thought I would never get my kids back, and I did not know a way out of the lifestyle I was living. Through the process, people seen and believed in me and seen potential in me and let me know that. So I knew that there was something I could do. I could change something. I could change, even if it's one thing, I can change something in my life. And that's what parents need to know. They're already beaten down. They're full of shame and guilt. They feel like they're defenseless. We've committed child abuse. A lot of us are felons. We're guilty. We don't have a defense against it. And I think that just accepting where they're at and not rehashing constantly what happened, but really this is where we're at and this is how we need to move forward. And we do that a lot in our Polk County area through a pre-removal conference where we really get a plan for families right from the beginning so they have a direction to go. Because if you allow us to languish, we will languish, right? And we will go back to doing what we have always done. So I think just giving families hope that there's a way out and giving them a plan and a direction to move forward from the very beginning is critical. And then conversations can be, and they can be real conversations, but they don't have to be, they can be done in a way that supports families rather than making them feel worse and sending them back into the world in which they came.
Thank you, Denise. And so, Lisa, you're in the front seat as the community coordinator. So what have you found to be the most effective ways in engaging parents and making them feel supported?
I think, as others have said, it's, building that relationship through honesty. I think is the most critical thing that you can really do to connect with a family, and building a team around that family that is also going to be trustworthy and honest. We're very fortunate in Hillsborough County. The folks that we work with, we know we can toss the baton, and that they're going to take it, and they're going to I guess, hold the families and communicate with the families. So I think that's been one of the biggest things that we've been able to do. And then also kind of connecting with the family about the child, you know, and talking with the parent as the expert of the child, and tell me about your child, and, you know, just, you know, really just kind of connecting and letting them introduce you to the child. Like, I haven't met your child yet, tell me about him or her. So, you know, that's another strategy that I find very beneficial in connecting with families. And, you know, then, you know, they're always confused, as Judge Cohen said, you know, even when we go into court, you know, so much is kind of shared, but then helping them debrief after that, and making sure that, you know, either you do it yourself or you know that somebody's there that's going to be able to do that and give them the honest answers.
Thank you, Lisa. I just want to say this too, to add to that. Everything that we do, those of you who are here, you're here because you're invested in this type of work, and in using the Safe Babies approach. This is relational work, and relationships are not built overnight. So when you have a parent and they come to you angry, it's the essence of modeling for us to turn to them and invite them to take this journey with us. This is not happening to you, this is about you. For us, it's our work. This is our job, but it is their entire life on the line. So we invite them to take the journey with us. We open it with real conversation, and we bring honesty to them. We recognize their value and their purpose, and we're open enough to be transparent because we expect transparency from them, right? We owe them transparency. You can't help anybody by avoiding topics and not talking, and overlooking them and picking and choosing your battles, because you will see them again. We owe them transparency. And with that in mind, we can talk about concurrent planning. Because guess what? By definition, concurrent means it happens at the same time, which gives you the right to talk about it at the same time. How cool is that, right? So you're not blindsiding them. You're having an open and honest conversation. You're not going, yay, Mom, you're doing great. Can y'all meet me in the corner over here so we can talk about the backup plan? You're going to keep them, right? You have it in the room. You have it in the room at the same time, and you open that conversation up, not once, but every single time. A concurrent plan is not something that you put on paper and go, the backup plan is a fit and willing relative. The backup plan is Aunt Pat. You know why? Because Aunt Pat needs help today. Aunt Pat needs to know how to take care of that child the same way that biological parent is learning how to take care of that child, so that baby doesn't lose a single day of having a strong caregiver that feels supported and equipped to take care of them forever. That is concurrent planning, not a line on a piece of paper. So that's my soapbox. Let me get off of that and get you back to the panel and talk, Judge Cohen, if you would, judicially, how you use concurrent planning from the bench.
It is one of the most important things that we can do to ensure the safety, health, and well-being of infants and toddlers and all children and all family members that we serve, because it is a supportive, honest, open, transparent approach. And as Darneshia and I have said, it's not something we're whispering about in the backgrounds, and they know we're whispering about it in the backgrounds, and so they are saying, well, that's just one more reason not to trust you. And if we want them to trust us and be honest with us, we owe them the same dignity by being completely open and honest with them and not pulling any scams. And so it's important that, that they understand about two words, compliance and change. And that, again, we as professionals model that. We can comply and go to the parenting classes. We can comply and make a reasonable efforts finding. We can comply and, you know, and get through the federal reviews. But change is what we really want to see. Change is what works. Change is what lasts. And if but sometimes with parents who are in a bad place with addiction, mental illness, domestic violence, we need to know what those issues are so that we can reach them where they are ready to receive the help. And again, it's up to the judge to set the tone for that and help them understand that it's one thing to comply, but it's another thing to make some changes. And it's my job as the judge to make sure you're getting what you need when you need it, but no one's a mind reader. You need to tell your attorney what you need when you need it, because this case is an emergency. It's an emergency. You have one opportunity to get it right for this child. Now, we know that it's not good for a child to move from place to place, and bringing the science to the bench has been the greatest opportunity I ever had in my career. To say to a parent, we know from the science that every time we disrupt a child, there is a setback. Every time, because with the baby particularly, we're not just changing their placement, we're changing everything in their lives, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the routine, everything. So that communication, that co-parenting is so important, and that's why you really need, as Dr. McHale talks about, the triangle of co-parenting, so that the caregiver is keeping that relationship alive. Oh, when mommy calls and reads you the book, you know, I'm going to tell her, you can count to 10 now. That's wonderful. And keeping mommy alive in that child's life is so important, to have that concurrent plan and to be transparent. But we also know that we cannot sit around and say, oh, well, 6 months is up, a year's up, gee, now what do we do with this child? Because there's going to be a termination parental rights petition filed, and disrupt the attachment that this child has created with the caretaker of the last 6 months, 12 months, knowing that that is not a permanent placement. And one odd thing that happened to me late in my career was that I found out, although we had concurrent planning as part of our practice in law, that when that initial removal was made and that placement was made, that the Department of Human Services had a rule that prohibited them from asking the placement, if it were a foster care placement, if they were pre-adoptive. So it was completely in violation with what we were doing. There was such a disconnect between the legal system and what the agency was doing by rule. And we found out about it accidentally at a meeting, and of course, and we got it changed. But that just is another reason why we must sit down at the table together and talk and collaborate and educate each other about what is going on in our systems so that we stay out of those silos, because that was really disruptive to the concurrent plan. And when you keep talking about the science with the family, then they understand. You know, I've shown parents at the beginning those side-by-sides of the brain scan of the abused and neglected child and the healthy child, and you've all seen those. And that's something that they can really relate to. I've had so many parents, particularly fathers, come up to me after and they're still just amazed by that, and to tell them, you have the power to fill in the colors in this brain. You have the power to do that. And when you tell, in front of everyone, including the parent's attorney, you empower the parent's attorney so much to say, you know, the scientists tell us that for every additional visit per week, the odds of permanency within 1 year are tripled. Just one more visit each week means timely permanency for the child. 3 times better. So if we can have 5 a week, think what that does. And let them know that you really want that Plan A to work. But because of what we know about the brain development of your child, it's critical that I do my duty as a judge, and that is to make sure your child is in the best possible family to grow up healthy. And we want that to be you. You need to get healthy. But if it can't be you this time, I know you want your child to be in a healthy environment.
Just to jump a little bit on what Judge Cohen said, not all states have a policy or a practice about not talking about concurrent planning or permanency options with foster parents, but we actually do have a culture of not wanting foster parents to tell you the truth if they are willing to be the forever home for a child. We've made that a bad word. Maybe not intentionally, but we have made them fearful of being willing to be permanency and speaking to that in the midst of concurrent planning. They don't want to say it out loud out of fear that the child will be removed, they will be accused of sabotage, or they will be shopping. It will never, ever, ever be a day where a child has a limited number of people who are allowed to love them. They deserve to be loved by every single person that's near them. They didn't ask to be in care. They didn't ask to be in this process, but they do ask to be loved and wanted. And we should be supporting that. So every opportunity we have, we should be speaking to that out loud and asking, are you willing to be forever? Because if you are, please allow us to help arm you so that you can be forever. And so that that parent could actually hear, my baby is in a safe place with somebody that loves them. We have had parents sitting in a room with us that literally pointed across the room when they knew we were headed to termination and go, that's where my girls are going. Because they knew their children were loved. And we spoke that out loud and actively worked the concurrent plan so they weren't blindsided. And one day we decided to talk about concurrent planning. We talked about it every day because we needed to know this child was safe. So I'm going to hand it to Tiffany and ask, can you tell us what this looks like? Like even within the confines of a family team meeting, like how does concurrent planning work? Where's the role?
I think it's one of the primary roles, of the two. So when we talk in a family team meeting, we talk about the primary goal, what that is, and then at the same time we talk about concurrent goal. So when we're discussing needs of the parent, the biological parent, we also talk about any needs for the foster parent or where we are in that whole process. So I think it goes right along with normalizing that conversation. We talk about it every time and often and discussing what those needs are and what that looks like for the parent so that they can be as involved as possible. Also, I think most of the time in the family team meeting, I was going to say there's a lot of people here that we work with, it's almost like a plan A and plan B. It's not much different. All the circumstances are different than what I have for my own children. I have a will. I fully intend to be alive and living, but if not, do you know what I mean? I have a second plan in place. So I think when you kind of normalize it that there are many people that have 2 or 3 plans for their children, that's okay. And it kind of just eases tension, especially when we talk through it, and then we do it every 5 weeks. And they're able to ask questions, and having all those people in the room, the foster parent, it's huge for a parent. It really can help relax them. And I think that's kind of what happens in a family team meeting from my perspective. And so I feel like my job is to make sure that that's discussed at every family team meeting.
Thank you. And Laura, for you, representing the children in the case, if you would speak to honestly, the importance and urgency of the concurrent plan and what's the critical pieces that need to be shared out loud.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
What are the critical pieces of concurrent planning that need to be shared out loud for your client?
Because we meet every 5 weeks, we go over those components every 5 weeks, and the parents see we've got this goal up here, and as our judge says, we've got a safety net in place underneath, and we focus on the best interests of, again, back to the children. From my perspective, I talk to the parents about, they love their children. They want what's best for their children. And if plan A fails, what's the next best thing you want for your children, and how do we get there? And we talk about that. What does that look like? What steps are needed to achieve that? Maybe if it's looking for the aunt in Iowa, what needs to be done? What's the aunt's name? What's her address? What's her email? How do we contact her? So we can start getting those steps in place, and we actively work those steps every 5 weeks, so that if we come to a point, and I think because we do that so often, when we sometimes do get to the point of termination, a lot of the parents in the family team meetings will voluntarily terminate. They want what's best for their children. They love their children. They see that they cannot be the parent that they want to be at this particular point in time, and they often will just relinquish rights because they still want what's best. And we've talked about it so often. They've known the steps. We've worked through whatever that we're trying to, whatever components are needed to achieve that goal. And so often that's the best thing is, again, establishing the relationship and the constant communication, and then identifying what steps are needed, whether it be obtaining a permanent custodian, whether it's finding a guardian, what we need to do, and how we need to get there.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, thank you. Denise, will you talk about concurrent planning through the lens of a parent?
So I heard a lot about honesty in relationships, and I can say that is really critical in the lives of our families. When we're working with a parent that, and we're talking about concurrent planning, we every time we see, I mean, it's easy for parents to get involved or get preoccupied with things that are happening in their life, with baby's daddies or whatever the situation is. There's all kinds of things going on in their life. So we are constantly saying, what are you doing today to get your kids back? I mean, is this the goal that you want? And really talking with them. And it is so relationship-based because families, I mean, we know that all children should not go home. We also know, research shows us that kids do much better if we heal the family and kids do go home, right? I mean, we know that they need to be connected to their community, to their friends, to their schools, to their coaches, to their relatives. I mean, we know that. We know that that's best for things for kids. So we really try to keep parents focused on what they're doing every single day to accomplish that goal. And if it's not, if something, then we need to have them conversations too. And we need to support them through whatever that decision is, right? So I think one of the hardest things for parent partners when they come in and do this work is understanding that some parents aren't going to do what they need to do to get their kids back, right? It's a struggle for parents. Parents want everybody to be reunified and have this wonderful, successful life, but we know that the reality is that that's just not the case. That some kids can't go back home, and some parents aren't going to do what they need to do. And we need to have them conversations all throughout their case. Because if they're not going to do it, if they can't do it, then we need to be able to have them conversations with their team. And so our work as parent partners is to connect them and engage them with all the people on their team so that they're able to have them relationships that are so critical to the success of their children. Our goal is always, our primary goal as parent partners is always the safety of children and the permanency of children and the well-being of children. So it's easy to get caught up on how a parent is getting mistreated by the system, and we always bring it back to this. What are you doing today? What are you going to do? What have you done today to get your kids back? What step are we going to take? What movement are we going to make to get them moving in the right direction, if that's what their goal is? We've had some parents that have decided that they are going to terminate the rights, and that's okay because we're going to walk through that with them too. And I think the most important is I've heard honesty and I've heard relationships and accountability. That all has to take place internally, and we need to have them relationships with parents to be able to get them there. When I started taking accountability for what I had done and for my family, and my life started moving forward, and my case started moving forward. And and until that point, it did not. So it's okay to have them conversations and say, okay, what are you doing? You're totally off the beaten track here. Let's get you back. Let's get you moving in the right direction. I mean, I think it's okay to have them conversations as long as it's done respectfully and supporting them in a way that they're able to see the person in you, because we're just people. I'm not what I was. I'm not that drug addict, although in every article that I've ever been in, it starts out Denise Moore, drug addict. I'm like, can we get rid of the drug addict? But
Yes, we
But we don't. I mean, they don't have to be that people. They move and they change, and we need to believe in that. If we're going to continue to do this work, we have to believe in change. We have to believe in changing people. So.
Thank you, Denise. So, Lisa, you want to weigh in on how you address concurrent planning in your role as a community coordinator?
Well, I'm going to have to have a courageous conversation right now in that in our team, concurrent planning is not as central as we want it to be. And so I think that that's something that we have to be courageous in reflecting upon where we are as a team and how much, where we need to grow in that. I think that, of course we have concurrent planning. It's a law, and we do it. And because we're still new, even though we've been doing this about a year and a half, we're still new. We've been moving very kind of incrementally. And so, we're just getting to cases where we have a concurrent plan, but we haven't been working that plan as closely as we should have been. And so, we see the challenges that it brings up for the family and for the decision making. So, oftentimes it's very difficult for people to have those conversations. And I think that, as a team, that's something that we really need to work on, how we're going to do that, how we're going to frame that. Our parents' attorneys don't want the concurrent plans on the case plans. I think we see it as, potentially something that dissuades the parents, kind of puts them in a place where, okay, we don't believe that this is possible. So, really bringing our community to a place where we can have a very positive conversation. And I love what you said, Tiffany. That exact idea came to me last week, where it really is about anyone who has a child has a plan. And that, so normalizing that with parents. And I think that's the intent to take. And I think that's the best strategy that we can really go to with parents, because they are the experts of their children. And, they, like as any good parent, we want to have a plan. And so hinging it upon that and putting the ball in the parents' court about really what would you do and who would you want to see with your child and in the life of your child, and who can continue your values and your culture with your child. So that's something that that we really just need to do. And I think a lot of times, it's a hard conversation because we're not used to having those conversations ourselves. A lot of times there's things in our family that are hard to discuss. And so we personally maybe in our first families don't discuss those things. And so, kind of reflecting upon that, about how it is hard to be honest and talk about the tough things, but, we have to pull together as a team and make a plan around that,
So you don't even realize the lead into that. That was so awesome. I would have to say thank you for your truth.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we tell our parents when they have to share with us something that feels less than what they knew we were wanting from them, because they do kind of try to meet our goals. And we thank them for their truth, even if it's not the what that we had hoped to hear from them. I love that, because that is growth. I want to share a story with you guys real quick about concurrent planning and having real conversations, and really to sum up the essence of everything they said. And we had a mom, and I love her. I love her. And she fought really, really hard to get her kids back. She had 3 kids, really, really hard. And it just would never click, and she struggled, and she fought with her own complex trauma throughout her entire life, and being handed from her mom to her stepdad and all the abuse, and grew up and got into relationships where there's just domestic violence repeatedly and drug use. She desperately tried to unpack those bags, but her kids all had special needs too. And we worked with her and openly had conversations about concurrent planning. And when we reached the day where we knew that we couldn't turn back and that we couldn't get them home, nobody wins in termination, by the way, ever. Nobody wins in a termination. That's a severing that you can't put back. And you need to acknowledge that and respect that we severed something we can't put back. We honored that with her, transitioned everything with her. Her concurrent plan turned into a transition in how she engaged with her children, how they engaged in therapy, took her out, her visitations all over the city. We're recording things, making videos for her and her kids. She's recording messages to them saying, Mama loves you. I love you so much that I'm gonna make sure you get safely home. I'm so sorry I couldn't do this. She gave them a goodbye. She wrote them each letters. It gave her closure. It gave her peace. We gave that to their forever home because we said, don't hand it to them today. You don't have to play this video every day and show them all the stuff they made in the scrapbooks. But one day, 5, 10, 15 years from now, they're going to come to you and ask you what happened. And you're not going to have the answer because that was her story. But she left them something. And you can share that with them because they're going to need that piece. That is part of concurrent planning. She walked with us all the way up to and through that court hearing. And she sat in Judge Warren's court and stayed there until the judge said, thank you for coming. That woman stood up and turned around and hugged every single person at that table and thanked them. She hugged her caseworker. She hugged every attorney and said, thank you. Thank you. She had that closure, and we gave her that. And I'm telling you that because I want you to know that it's possible. You really can do that. You really can give people closure and peace, and there's a way to do this. We can't avoid it sometimes. It's in the best interest to terminate. Sometimes it is, but there's a way to do that work. That's what we're trying to speak to. There's a way to do it. I'm encouraging you to take that seed home and apply that. Even in a slight shift, apply that. And speaking to that is speaking to the angel of reality. Sometimes there's bad days. There's tough moments in the case. There's tough moments in the potential outcomes. But you've got to be able to share that conversation with transparency, with honesty and openness, and without judgment. So, I'm going to ask the panel to talk to us about their ways of creating safe spaces to have courageous conversations.
Well, as many of you know, I spent the first 12 years of my adulthood after my bachelor's degree as an elementary school teacher. And I often ask, is anyone else in the room a teacher? And by the end of the session, I ask the question, and everybody raises their hand, because that's really what we all do, right? We want to support healthy changes in behavior by teaching others ways to be healthier and to take care of themselves and each other. But you have to know the starting place, and you have to know, again, when anyone in your courtroom is receptive to those changes, when they're healthy enough to take the next step, when they're healthy enough to move forward. And as I often say, stop looking backwards, not to the parents necessarily, but to a lot of the professionals. It's not about what happened, but what happened to you. Let's go from there. Don't look back. We're not going that way. We're going forward. So we are all teachers, and it's difficult for many legal professionals to have these courageous conversations at a more touchy-feely level because we don't learn those skills in law school. We can have any bachelor's focus, political science, communications, anthropology. You can have any good GPA from any background and get into law school and then become a lawyer and then maybe a judge. But we are all teachers. And when you take your message back to your communities, if they're still having trouble getting their head around this concept of concurrent planning, I love what Tiffany said about the will. That is just a perfect example of concurrent planning that everyone can relate to. Sometimes we can define it in the negative, too. Concurrent planning isn't sequence planning. And you have to keep, at every hearing, at every contact, teach and know your audience, what they're ready for, and remind them, and keep moving forward. To help myself, I created a script, and to help others. And that's another script that's in your materials. There's one for judges, and then there's one for everybody else. And Judy Norris, our technical assistant, person for the QIC as well as my long-term community coordinator, and I developed these scripts. And I wish I had had these scripts earlier on, because it is easier to give legal professionals, especially, the confidence to have these collateral conversations outside of this is the federal law, this is the state law, and just ticking the boxes and complying, but not helping to lead the change that we all really want to have happen. So I encourage you to use these scripts, to look at them, to rebuild them, share them, and in the end of the first paragraph, when I suggest the judges are talking to the parents, I end it and I say, you deserve and need to know what is at stake in this case. You deserve and need to know what is at stake in this case. And that sets, again, the tone for everyone. And then outside the courtroom, in a safer space, because the courtroom is never, let's face it, it's never going to be a safe place emotionally for many, many people who have had nothing but traumatic experiences. Maybe mom saw her father taken out in shackles and handcuffs and never saw him again the last time she was at the courthouse. And we talk about our trauma-informed practices. You know, it starts on the sidewalk outside the courthouse. It doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts with everyone being professional and dignified and respectful. And the judge has to model that. We all have to model that and not be talking about what we did on Father's Day in earshot of a father who couldn't see his child on Father's Day, or talk about other things, collateral things. We need to send the message at every level that this is a serious, safe place for you to be. And we, you know, judges by definition have to judge. So it's particularly tricky not to do that in a judgmental way. And that's why I keep going back to that great phrase, the law requires me, da-da-da-da-da. Then you throw some science in, which really helps. For example, in the pregnancy discussion, if you have a mom who was in foster care, and how many of our moms were in foster care? Lots and lots of them. Start with some science that's neutral, that sets the stage. We know that 1/3, 33.33% of former foster females become pregnant before age 17. So if judges are armed with this, then that opens the door to a non-judgmental way of opening the conversation about reliable birth control. How do you think a baby's going to impact your goals? What are your goals? And maybe the judge isn't the person to do that conversation, but the judge is sure the person to say, is there someone in the courtroom that you would like to have that conversation with? Because I'm going to order somebody to help you get this information. Do you want to pick that person and empower that parent to decide, I want my CASA to do that. I want the community coordinator to do that. I can get that information from my social worker or my lawyer. And then I sign them up and I put it in the order. CASA shall provide mom with information about reliable, long-acting birth control or reproductive contraception, and where to access it. That's another thing. You've got to know your community in order to have the trust. You can't just sit in your little silo. We found out in our community that the kids would not go to Planned Parenthood because the culture was in the high schools, if you go to Planned Parenthood, there's only one reason you're going to Planned Parenthood, and that's because you have a sexually transmitted disease, an STD. So we were able to work with the community to get a satellite Planned Parenthood that wasn't called Planned Parenthood, and the kids swarmed it. It was only open a couple days a week. They swarmed it because there wasn't that stigma. So you have to know what the stigma is in your community and how to resolve it. And it can be done so easily by talking to people. And Denise, I'm going to, before I close, ask you to have a courageous conversation with all of us and tell us what we need to do better, what has pushed the needle in the wrong direction in your experience, because I know when it comes your turn to talk, if you could talk about that, I think it would be really helpful for all the judges.
Go, Denise.
Go
Denise.
Jared's going to give you two
Oh gosh, this is a lot of pressure.
Let us have it. Because I've learned so much from her on what not to do.
I think, so much has changed in the system since when I was involved. I will say the way that we, and especially in 0 to 3 courts and in our family treatment courts, the way that we're rallying around families is so amazing. When I was in the system, it was a case plan in the mail. We were really sitting down with families from the very beginning and talking to them about the way they can improve their lives. And I think that that's incredible. And I think that, I see so much trauma in our kids when they're removed from their parents. And I think about concurrent planning, and I think about all the families that come into the system and they're scared to identify relatives or dads, and they don't want their family to know. And really from the very beginning, when it comes to concurrent planning, we're talking to them about really identifying who them supports are, even if they're dad's side of the family, because at the end of the day, we need to have them at the table, because we can't bring them in at the end and say, okay, now we're going to go search them out. I think family team meetings, supporting families, keeping them together, critical piece. My kids today have these amazing lives, and they've overcome so much of our generational cycle because of the interventions that took place. And, my mom probably wasn't the best relative placement. She probably wasn't the first one. In reality, if they knew the whole story, they would have chose. But she was the best for that situation because my kids got to stay together, they got to stay in their school, they got to stay with their friends, they got to stay with their coaches, and the only thing that was missing was me, We have to think outside the box. My worker, when she came into my life, she was thinking outside the box. That was a known drug house and she let my kids stay there, and my mom move in. And my mom has a history, my family has a history, but she knew that rather than separating my kids and moving them to different foster cares, she kept them together, and that was critical to their success. And today it is. When you see them, the relationships that they've built, it's amazing. I don't even know where they got it. Actually, I'm like, where'd you learn that from? But they have these fabulous lives, and we can do that. We can do that with families. And I think if we start looking at family as a whole unit rather than we have to remove to keep kids safe, we need to start healing families as a whole. We're traumatizing children and we're traumatizing parents when we're separating them, and then we're wondering why there's no attachment, and we're trying to put them back together, and it's a nightmare. You can't keep a baby away from a mom for 6 months and then wonder why they're not attached. So I just think that we got to do more work around that. Of keeping families together and keeping them in their community. And the support teams around families is a huge movement, and it is absolutely necessary for some of the families with the multiple issues and the kind of issues that they're dealing with and the communities that their kids are being raised in. It's getting scarier and scarier out there. So however we can support families in a team approach is really beneficial. And I think, and it does no good us fighting amongst each other. When we have, a child attorney fighting with a parent attorney at the table, it does no good it's not doing any good for anybody. If we could just all come together on the same page, okay, this happened, it really happened, this is where we're at, and how are we gonna move forward from here? And thinking what's in the best interest of the kids. And I'm an advocate for reunification. so I always think that we can do more to support parents in a way to help them be successful, and how we can keep families together and keep kids at home. not have to have that removal process. And if we do have to have the removal process, which is necessary sometimes, and it was necessary in my case, how we can get them back together quicker, and how can we make them visits happen sooner. So I guess that's my spiel.
Lisa, were you ready? You wanted to respond to that?
I think Judge Cohen just gave us a perfect example of how to create a safe space is to ask questions and then to really listen to understand the answers. And to understand the answers, you have to talk to the families who really know what's going on in their lives. So, I think this was just a great example of that. So thank you, Judge Cohen, and thank you for sharing, Denise. Tell us it all the time, where we went wrong.
And speaking to that, I'm kind of going to ask Tiffany and Laura to lean into this last piece, is talking about how we do that in creating safe spaces, which requires a bit of tact in order to produce transparency in that conversation, safely produce transparency, and hoping for an outcome of honesty. So if you would speak, and Tiffany, you've got an awesome formula from family team meetings to how you create a safe space that promotes transparency in the hopes of getting honesty from all sides.
Well, I would say that the whole team creates that safe space. So thank you for giving me the kudos, but I have very little to do with it. It's truly all the attorneys and everyone coming around that table every 5 weeks. I feel like what I use, or the tools that I use, more than any other, are reframing. So just kind of putting in a different category, rephrasing a lot and trying to neutralize language, because it's not all, flowers. I mean, there are some arguments at those meetings. So at least trying to put them, neutralize it and put them in a place where we can deal with them. Where it's more matter of fact, like you just said, this is what happened, where do we go from here? But also one thing that I think is helpful is it's hard to listen to people talk about you and around you because they're going a million miles per hour, especially different attorneys. They have one way in the line of questioning they're asking. That's exactly where they're going, is something else, which is different than a social worker. So having people process that out loud, which goes to what Lisa said about the questions. So I think you have to ask the questions and say, why are you asking that? Now, one example I think that comes up quite often is, well, are you dating him? Are y'all back together? Okay, why are you asking that question to her? So you have to be able to explain it, because if you are, then we want to work from a place to be able to support that relationship. And so that just alleviates some stress there, and that's how you get honesty, is by building that trust and just processing out loud of why you're asking the questions. So I think my role as a facilitator is just to, since I have a neutral hat on, or at least I don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, is to be able to, talk me through it so I can be the person that's maybe uninformed, and so everyone else can say face. Talk me through why you're asking her that question so I can understand more, because I can, the advantage is also I'm at the front of the room, I get to see everyone's face. People going, oh,
Yeah.
So you can kind of say, okay, we're disconnected here. So I think that establishes a trust.
Also on that note, I would say, the parents know, we have to include them in that conversation. They have to internalize what's happening. So, ask them. We ask them, what do you think's going well? What do you need from us to make it better? And what are your needs, and help them to appropriately say that in family team meetings, so that they're able to say what their needs are, because families are really scared to say what they really truly need.
And along that, it's probably the flexibility to be able to meet those needs.
Right.
Because it's one thing to ask the question with no plans to do anything about it.
Right.
Which is a pet peeve of mine, right? If you're going to ask the question, what do you need, and they tell you what they need, well, then we need to be able to meet that need.
Right.
So we've
Lucy
gotta be-
says that don't peel back the Band-Aid unless you're prepared to address the
right.
wound. Yeah. Thank you, guys. We're getting short on time, so I really want to close this out and share the message with you about how you do this work and being brave enough to have conversations that are difficult to power through, and hopefully applying some of the tools and incredible resources that Judge Cohen provided for you guys today in handouts too. And keeping in mind the things that Denise said about engaging parents and what they need from you, and then sharing truths, recognizing where you are in that space and go, how do I do this better? Because if we keep reflecting on how we do this, all we can do is grow from there and continue to grow from there. But being honest enough with ourselves to go, are we doing this effectively? What more could we be doing? We had a caseworker who worked with us for 5 years, known as the Terminator, known for terminating more parents than any other worker. And he's pretty proud of that. And we even had parents that would come back and say, he told me he was God to me and that he decided whether or not I would get my kids back. This is not a team effort. That's not true. I'm a Safe Babies case. It took him 5 years to come back to us and sit at the table and say, thank you for sticking with me as a worker so that I could reflect on how I was talking to my parents, on what I was offering them, and for me to think, am I going even one step beyond the basics that my job requires of me to meet their needs? It took him a minute to get to that place. I told a story in the DV session yesterday about a mom who said, don't give up on me. I know I wasn't ready to walk through the door when you had that door opened, but don't give up on me. I'm trying. I promise I'm trying. They're saying it too. And you have to understand that in this work and the way we're doing things, we're actually going against the new natural grain of this work. And I don't think people intended to get there. It just happened, and we became more and more reactive, and we don't have time to power through a real conversation and give somebody truth. We just need the bottom line. This is an opportunity to flip that and go back to giving people just a few more minutes to explain, what do you mean? What is that? To provide some clarity for them and to open the door for real conversation, because that conversation is going to produce services, it's going to produce movement, it's going to produce outcomes. But we get to do that work. We get to walk away from here and say, what new thing can I do Monday when I'm in front of a family? And challenge yourself to find one new thing from this that you can do Monday when you go back to work. And you better go back to work Monday because you've been at the beach all week. So we are short, really. We have like 2 minutes maybe for questions if anybody has one. I think some of us could probably stick around too. Yes, ma'am.
As a parent's attorney, I know that everyone knows that concurrent planning is concerned. My question, though, is I think a lot of this hinges, there's been so much discussion on courageous conversations with the parents. What about courageous conversations with these foster parents who now are attached and then the child goes home? I think I want to know more about recruiting and training of foster parents, because I'm not going to tell stories. Everybody has one. One bad experience with a foster parent, it's difficult to trust when you're coming to the table immediately with a foster parent who says, yes, I want to adopt. And so then, because I have to have that conversation now, our court is not up and running yet. I have to have that conversation with my clients now from the beginning. Yes, these people will probably want to adopt because these are babies. And how do you find foster parents who are going to really work this and not be working to adopt the baby? That they're going to really work with these parents. And I agree with the whole not enough people. Everything you said makes sense. But from my experience, it concerns me about the foster parents. They have to be, there are those special foster parents. There are, I know there are. But not everyone is like that. And how do you find those people? And how do you make sure that these people understand that this is the goal?
You breed them on purpose. So you cannot have a courageous conversation with a foster parent without creating a network of support around it. Because you do absolutely want them to love and care for that child. But when you're breeding foster parents, what you're doing is teaching them how to cheerlead for the parent and advocate for the child at the same time. So they're in support of reunification with this focus. We want you to love that baby. We want you to love them so much that you want them to be safe at home with their parent. So everything that you know, that's the structure, that's the schedule, the routine this baby has, share that with the parent. Let's get opportunities to co-parent, because all you're doing really is creating extended family. They become natural respite. The case closes. They become the aunt, the grandma, the grandpa. They're connected, but you have to nurture that. You have to arm them. We do support groups for our foster parents and safe babies in Arkansas, and so they come to those support group meetings, and we bring mental health professionals to talk to them about how can you, in this house, help this baby unpack their bags that they're carrying in here. How can you understand that when they're crying or feeling broken after they've gone to a visitation with their parent, that this isn't because the parent is just so horrible the child couldn't stand being near them. It's because they heard a heartbeat that they knew, and they are dysregulated, and we need you to be still and help them regulate when they get back home. So we teach them how to do that. So they're working through the lens of the child. They're advocating for that baby. They're supporting that baby from their chair. I promise you it reduces that sabotage, because they are engaged, they are invested, but more importantly, they are valued as an important person in this child's life. What else?
Darneshia, I just wanted you to tell the story of how you started having meetings between the parents and the foster parents before family team meetings.
Oh, the icebreaker?
Yeah.
So my favorite icebreaker was a mom who, it's the very first family team meeting, and so they need a minute because they're already just scared and frightened walking in the door, and they don't know what to expect. And the foster mom had been one of our foster parents in the past, so she knew us and knew how we worked. And so I don't have the mic. I'm going to try to talk loud. So thanks. So before the family team meeting, they're across the hall, and the foster mom's sitting in the chair, and she's waiting. And mom walks in the door, and we're like, over here, and there's another person in the room with them, too. And so as she's walking in the door, the foster mother is standing like this. And she brought her in, and she hugged her, and she pulled her back, and she said, your baby's okay. And that mom just immediately started crying. It was just the peace of knowing, like, okay, she's safe. This person is safe, and she's safe. And then she said, come, sit down. And so they sit next to each other, and she goes, how are you? Are you okay? And she said, yeah. And she said, how's the baby? And so she had a hard time at first. You know, she wasn't sleeping great, but now she's getting in her routine. She's doing okay. I brought you pictures. And they're sitting there, and they're going through this together. They got up out of that room and walked in their family team meeting together with a mom who was ready to work because she knew her baby was okay and safe. You could do that and breed a culture of foster parents who say, I love this baby so much, I want this baby to be safe. So if I went to the doctor and mom missed that medical appointment and they taught me something new about feeding and how to deal with the reflux, the first thing I'm gonna do is show that to mama because I need her to be safe in the visit. And I know something she doesn't know, and we love this baby. You could do that on purpose. On purpose. Foster parents exist like that. It's not for everybody. It really isn't, and you gotta respect their boundaries and understand that if they can't, they can't. But don't discredit everybody because that foster parent wasn't ready. Judge Cohen created this 2-for-2 reading. That has been the best inroad to foster parents who are afraid of boundaries to say, you know what, here's a blanket, here's a book. Mama's got this same book, and every time we're in family time, mom's reading this book to this baby and turning the pages. But guess what we did? We recorded mom reading that book on one of our smartphones, because who doesn't have a smartphone? Forwarded the recording to the foster parent and said, do me a favor. I get you're not ready for mom to come to the house to cook dinner with you guys and see what the bedtime routine looks like, but that actually is possible. But will you play this recording with this blanket every night before you put this baby to sleep and just flip the pages so this child can hear that mother's voice with a blanket that smells like mom because she washed it in her laundry detergent like the rest of her clothes. And you connect the dots into that baby, I'm safe right here, and I'm safe right here. And they connected the dots without stepping over the boundaries of that foster parent who wasn't ready yet. And from there, they become ready for phone calls, for day visits, for trips to the park together. They become ready. But you give them the same baby steps that we give families so that you breed those foster parents. Thanks, Lucy.